Texas is redistricting and might create about 4 or 5 new Republican seats. In response, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said, we're not going to sit idly by, and he's threatening to call in an emergency legislative session so that we would redistrict after 5 years rather than 10 years, create enough seats to offset the new seats from Texas. I thought I'd talk about this with my guest. He was born in the UK, Hungarian parents who were on the run from communism, went to Oxford, joined a big advertising agency, co-founded the Good Business consulting firm, and a London restaurant called The Good Cook. In 2005, returned to politics, became the Prime Minister's head of strategy. Then he moved to Silicon Valley here in California, where he taught at Stanford. He co-founded a political crowdfunding platform called CrowdPAC. His website is stevehiltonforgovernor.com. Please welcome back to the program, Steve Hilton.
Larry, amazing to be with you. Wow, I'd forgotten about all that stuff.
Very impressive. Very impressive, my friend.
Thank you, thank you.
So Gavin Newsom is responding to what they're doing in Texas. And I saw you, I think it was on Fox Business, I'm not quite sure which was it, Fox News or Fox Business, and you pointed out that California is 35-40% Republican, yet in terms of the House membership, we're about 16-17% of the seats. Something is wrong here.
100%. So look, that's the first step we've got to take, which is this is, they say we're responding, we're fighting fire with fire. They already lit the fire here in California because they took the independent redistricting process that the voters approved in initiatives in 2008 and 2010 in California, and they totally hijacked it. The Democrats corrupted that process, gerrymandered the districts, so we are wildly out of proportion in terms of the Republican vote and the Republican representation in Congress. Now he's using this excuse of Texas to go even further, Gavin Newsom, and he's doing it because he's running for president and he wants to look like the big guy sticking it to President Trump, and you can tell that by what he said. Literally, this is a quote from him in the last few days. He said, we've got to do this in order to, quote, end the Trump presidency. That's Gavin Newsom's words.
Yeah.
He says, we're going to steal another 6 House seats, that's what he's talking about, for protection clause in the California Constitution and the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, because of the principle of one person, one vote. That has repeatedly been interpreted by the Supreme Court and the California Supreme Court as meaning that electoral districts have to be roughly the same population. The only way to establish that is after a census. That is why the redistricting is supposed to happen after a census. 5 years into it, they don't know what the population is. Look at the millions of people who fled the high taxes and chaos of California. You've had whole communities burnt to the ground. What happened to those people? It is ridiculous. Common sense tells us they can't draw new maps without a new census. There's not going to be a census till 2030. So I've announced today that if Newsom goes ahead with this, I will file a lawsuit in state court and federal court based on this equal protection argument, and I think we've got a very good chance of stopping him.
Steve, shouldn't we be filing a lawsuit anyway, even if Newsom does not do this because of this imbalance that you just now pointed out? Isn't that against the law?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting. No, exactly. And funnily enough, I've been on that even before this latest thing with Texas, because I learned about this a few years ago and I spoke to people involved in the original process of implementing what the voters decided. They really did want to take the power away from politics and have independent districts. But that was corrupted by the Democrats. They inserted all these ridiculous criteria to allow them to gerrymander. One of them was communities of interest rather than actual communities, because the original intent was to try and make the districts reflect existing city and county boundaries. They threw that out the window. The staff that were drawing up the maps were partisan rather than independent, and so on. So there's all these fixes that need to be made to the process. I totally agree. We should be doing that. Now, as to whether we can do that with legal action or whether we need another initiative, I don't know. We need to look into that. But we can't go on like this. Because, it's, by the way, it's not just the House seats. It would affect me as governor, because you've got right now in California a supermajority, as they call it, for the Democrats in the state legislature. That's how they've been ramming through all this extreme legislation, the insanity, you know, the climate stuff, all this stuff that makes everything so expensive and a nightmare in California. all through their 2/3 majority in the state legislature. But that's not legitimate, because that's based on gerrymandered districts as well. So this is a really big deal.
So given what you said, Steve, about the unfairness of doing this at the 5-year level rather than the 10-year level, which is when the census is conducted, how do you feel about what they're doing in Texas?
They have a different constitution. It's not, it's you know, I believe in federalism. I believe in the 10th Amendment very strongly. Each state should have the power to do things their own way. Now, as to whether the federal constitutional argument applies, that's for someone else to say. I'm focused on California. I'm not responsible for what they do in Texas. And by the way, I do agree, and I said this morning, I'd rather not be talking about this. I'd rather not be talking about this kind of political stuff, because people hate that. They hate politicians arguing with each other. We want to be talking about how we cut gas. You know, I've got a plan for $3 gas in California to reduce people's bills, to end the crime. All this, the crime wave. You know, there's so many real things that matter more to people. Yes, I'd much rather be talking about that, but we can't let this it's outrageous power grab from Gavin Newsom go unchallenged.
Since the last time we talked, Kamala Harris has announced she's not going to run for governor. How does that affect you one way or the other?
Yeah, it's interesting, because some people have said, well, you know, this is you know, you'd rather run against her because the whole country will be united in supporting you. Let's beat her again. Be good for fundraising. I think there's some truth to that. But it's obvious that her heart wasn't in it. She has no interest in California or our problems here. What does she have to say about the housing crisis or water shortages and what's being done to our farmers? No, she doesn't know about any of that stuff. And I think the real point is this, that actually without her in the race, I think it's going to be easier to make the argument about California. Obviously, the other Democrats, because the record is such a disaster in California, they can't defend it. We have the highest poverty rate, the highest unemployment rate in America right now. We have the worst business climate. All these things are just a disaster that's indefensible. They're going to want to make next year's race all about Trump, Trump, Trump. You know what they're like.
Yeah.
But without her in the race, I think we've got more of a chance of making it about California, which is my plan, and to set out an alternative that's positive. And I think, look, we just had a poll, UC Irvine poll the other week. Over 60%, I believe, say the state's going in the wrong direction. I think there is a majority for change in California. That's my job, to make that argument. And so in a way, I think it doesn't matter who the Democrats put up. The central argument has to be, you can't have a Democrat. It is time for change. We have to end one-party rule.
Steve Hilton for Governor.com. Steve, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.